Hunt with passion. Never stop casting. Chase the dream. Welcome to Season 3 of Musky Mastery Outdoors, sponsored by Joe Bucher Outdoors, #1 in big game fish products.
All right, guys, welcome to the first vlogging video in our Season 3 here. I cannot thank all of you subscribers, the fans out there, for your endless support and your enthusiasm, your comments, and it's just been awesome. I know I speak for the other guys on our Musky Mastery Pro staff. We cannot thank you guys enough. It has been fantastic. All the enthusiasm and kind words about our third season here of the Musky Mastery YouTube show has been phenomenal. And I am super, super excited to kick it off with a vlog series video here, one of many to come, about my #1 producing lure of my biggest muskies in the state of Wisconsin, pressured waters in the northeast section of Wisconsin, Eagle River area, Three Lakes, St. Germain, Rhinelander, Minocqua. These are lakes and bodies of water that get hit hard, but the lure that gets it done for me is the 700 Buchertail in the tinsel, in the tin buck, in the regular buck hair patterns. And I want to talk a little bit about what makes this lure so special to me. And, I'll just say, first of all, it's so versatile. A bucktail is not just a one way, one crank method, there's not one way to work this, is what I'm saying. There's so many ways to be versatile with a blade, and I want to talk about that today. Now, a special thanks to those of you who participated in the community poll that I put out. I said I was going to be doing this video on the Buchertail 700 series, and I asked you guys, what did you want me to talk about? The #1 comment was this, or question, I should say. When do you fish the Buchertail 700 instead of throwing something else? Let's say a top raider, let's say a crankbait or a glide bait. When are you throwing the 700 Buchertail? And the answer is actually pretty simple. This lure is a search bait. And what I mean by search bait is that it enables me to search and cover water very, very quickly and effectively. I can, instead of hitting 5 spots and doing it slowly with a glide raider, which is important when the conditions call for it, but under the correct conditions, which I'm going to hit on here, the Buchertail 700 allows me to cover not 5 spots, but maybe 10, 12 spots, and to do it very, very fast. And there's a number of reasons for that. But again, this is a search lure, and then once we locate a muskie, of course, you don't catch all of them. A lot of times they'll just follow, but that's a big deal. When I'm getting those follows on the 700 Buchertail, that's a win, and then I can go back and finesse those fish into biting with something else, maybe a 5-inch shell raider, or a 7-inch shell raider, or a glide raider, or something else, a dancing raider, some kind of finesse lure in the JBO lineup. I'll go back and finesse them. But first, you gotta find them. And a lot of times in that searching period, you are catching muskies on this lure too. I mean, it is just a fish-producing machine, So, when to fish it? When you need to cover water quickly. Now, when do you wanna cover water quickly? Couple scenarios here I'll throw out there. How about you're fishing new water you've never been on? You've done your research, you've printed your maps out, you've talked to, some folks that have been on the water, you've gone online and done done your homework. Well, once you get out there, I want to cover that water quickly. I want to learn as much of that water as quickly as possible. Again, 700 Buchertail allows me to do that very, very well. Or let's say I'm going to fish a lake that I've guided on, but I haven't guided on it in 10 years. I have, these lakes are pretty cyclical. You'll have a hot year, you'll have a slow year. And some of these lakes I, fished very hard for a 5-year period, and then I just left them alone for a while. For whatever reason, maybe a bite picked up somewhere else. So when I go in to fish that lake again for the first time in a long time, a lot of times my initial thought is, give me a lure that I can fish quickly and efficiently and effectively. The blade is something that you can just cast, crank, and cover water fast. Another time in the when category, when am I fishing this lure, is when I've got weather coming in. Let's say we've got a storm approaching and you don't have a lot of time left on the water to fish safely. Buchertail 700 is the way to go. I mean, the idea is I can fish more spots in less time and get more fishing in before it gets dangerous and we have to get off the water. That's another opportunity where, you know, that's another, you know, a time when the 700's coming in handy for me. Now, why fish this lure? Now, comparing it to another search lure. So let's say the Top Raider. Everybody loves the Top Raider, as do I. They're just amazing search lures. Why fish the Buchertail 700 instead of a Top Raider? You're probably saying, well, Chaz, now there's a good one. They're both search baits. I can cast and crank that Top Raider in pretty quickly. I can do the same with the 700 or another blade. Well, the reason I would pick the blade over a Top Raider is when I would say the wind conditions or the light conditions don't favor the top water bite, for example. So a situation like that would be when I've got wind, you know, surface currents that are pushing whitecaps. Now, again, I like to fish Top Raiders in a chop. Don't get me wrong on that. On top of a chop, that's the real thing. But there comes a time when the wind is just too much to handle for a Top Raider. I just don't think I'm fishing it effectively at a certain point. Although I'm sure some of you will argue that you'll fish it in a, you know, a tornado, and they'll catch muskies in a tornado, I'm sure. But there's just a time when I feel, man, you know, over 20 miles an hour or something like that, I'm going to go subsurface because I just think it's more effective. It's all about being effective when you're on the water and using your time appropriately. So there's an example for you of when I would fish a Buchertail 700 over something like a Top Raider, another search lure. But again, the idea is to locate muskies with this lure and then go back. If they just follow, mark a waypoint, go back and finesse them with something else. You know, finessing them, what does that mean? Well, that could be simply downsizing if the fish came in, you know, pretty lethargic. It could be upsizing if the fish was aggressive and just didn't commit. But that's a when. Now, another thing that I want to talk about is night fishing, because that's another scenario that, as I was talking about, you know, here of why would you fish this lure? And, you know, if the conditions, if it's early and there's not a lot of, you know, light available, or if it's late, or you're fishing at night, I will tend to go subsurface more than on top. And, you know, there's a lot of different reasons for that, but just keeping this on a basic level here, I prefer in low light conditions, blade. Give me a blade, or of course, if I'm night fishing, you guys know out there that I love, you know, a depth raider, jointed depth raider, straight model depth raider. They're just fantastic night fishing lures. But again, a lure that complements those, you know, the DRs very, very nicely at night is a blade, and the 700 is just the perfect size. Now, when do I fish? You know, all these when questions. When do you fish it? When do you fish it? Well, this is something that will go against the grain a little bit on bucktail fishing, and that is I'm fishing this lure a lot of times from opening weekend in May in our northern Wisconsin season all the way till ice up in November. Yeah, I'm fishing this blade, you know, in cold water of 55, 50, even 45 degrees or less. Now, you know, how do you think this lure would be effective in those super cold temperatures, burning it in? It won't be if you're burning it in. And that's a really important point that I want to make. This lure, when do you fish it? I fish it all year long, from ice out till ice up. But one thing that I'm doing with this lure is I am changing my retrieve speed. Generally speaking, unless the muskies are telling me otherwise, which you got to listen to the fish. They're the ones in charge of their appetite. If I'm fishing cold water, what I will more often than not do is just slow my retrieve speed. Cold water, slow things down. That's a really important point that I want to make. Now, as far as where do I fish the Buchertail 700, you know, generally speaking, I would say shallow water is where I'm spending the most time fishing this lure. This would be your classic weed flats, classic shallow water rock flats and things like that. You know, wood, you can fish this over trees, deadfalls, all that kind of stuff. So generally speaking, I'm fishing this in areas where I don't have a ton of space between the cover I'm fishing, whether it's weeds, rocks, wood, whatever it is, and the surface. There's a narrow window there where you can get a lure, a shallow running lure through effectively. But as I've shown here in Season 3, Episode 18 to be exact, this lure and the 8 Magnum, and the double 10 and the 500, these blades can also be fished over deep water too. Again, it just comes down to this retrieve speed thing. You're not always burning this lure in. You can crank it slow and it will, you'll just allow that lure to move down deeper into the water column, closer to where those fish might be holding on that structure. That's something really, really important that I want to bring up, is that this isn't just a shallow water lure. You have to think creatively about the blade. It is not a one, application lure. You can do so much with this. You can, sometimes on rock reefs, I'll actually cast this out, let it sink to the bottom. It'll only take a couple seconds, and then just start retrieving real slow and just crawl that blade along the bottom. That's another way to get them on hard structure, rock structure, gravel structure, stuff like that. Especially gravel flats, when you're not going to snag up into the real craggly rock. When I'm fishing gravel flats, sometimes I will crank it so slow that it's actually ticking like a crankbait would, ticking the rocks. So that's really cool. So where to fish? Really anywhere. Do not limit yourself with the 700, but again, primarily it's usually over shallow cover. That's where I'm fishing it. Now, how do I fish it? The technique? Well, it's very simple. Cast and crank. That's why so many people love bucktails. But one of the poll questions on the community board was, how do I, make sure that that blade is spinning? And really, it's actually a simple answer to that. And I call it just thumbing the spool. So now we're going to talk, how do you like to fish it? Again, blast it out there. I like to do a real long cast with the Buchertail 700. Get it out there, cast a lot of times beyond the structure, and then start burning it in. Especially if I'm in warm water scenarios, I'm going to fish it fast and hot. Depends what the mood is of those fish. If I'm not seeing fish, maybe I'll fish it slower. But generally speaking, the how is cast and start cranking. But as far as getting that blade, getting the revolution started right away, a lot of times you need to really thumb it and thumb that spool and stop the lure in the air before it hits the water. The reason that's so important, this lure has got this big, heavy keel weight in there that really allows you to throw it a country mile. But again, that blade could be flailing in the wind, and I want to thumb it, stop it before it hits the water, so that blade will go, boop. It'll just snug right up to the shaft of that 700. And as it hits the water, it's going to start revolving right away. And a lot of times I'll just pair that up with a real fast, aggressive start to my retrieve. I like to burn it right out of the gates, make them want it. Make those muskies come and eat it. Don't sit there and slow it right out of the box. And again, I'm in my summer mentality as I'm saying this. I did talk about fishing it slow, but to get that blade spinning, even though I am going to slow this down sometimes, I'm talking once you thumb that spool, give it a good aggressive crank and you'll get those blades moving. That's really important. Next on is speed. The 700, again, as far as the speed's concerned, time of year dictates my general speed, but listening to the muskies, if you're not moving fish and you're just burning the hell out of this thing, fish it slower. Or if you're fishing it slow and you're not moving any fish, fish it faster. Pretty simple on the speed for a 700. And then, the figure eight's another, when do you fish a blade? When I've got a really hot bite going at boat side and the figure eight is where we're catching most of our muskies, it's really hard to beat the 700 as far as effectiveness in hooking and triggering. Really, I'd say triggering muskies that, from the retrieve portion of a cast moving into the figure eight. The 700, and like all bucktails, is just fantastic for just making that transition into the figure eight very seamless. The muskies really don't know what's happening, and you're more apt to get them to strike. So we've talked about when, we've talked about how I like to fish it. Now, how about the equipment? A long rod is really essential in bucktail fishing. For the 700 and the 500, really all of the Buchertail blade lineup, I'm fishing at least an 8.5-foot rod, preferably a 9-foot rod. And with the 700, because that's what this video is all about, the 700, the musky lure that has produced my largest Wisconsin muskies year after year, really, it's actually pretty incredible. I really like the 9-foot rod, and the perfect power for the 700 is a medium heavy. Medium heavy power just seems like the perfect match for the resistance that this 700 size blade makes in the water. When I'm figure eighting this, that rod, the medium heavy, is just a perfect rod. You'll see on the show quite a bit, you know, my go-to rod for bucktail fishing is St. Croix's Legend Elite 9-foot medium heavy fast action. That's just my number one go-to bucktail top rater, depth rater rod. Now, modifications. Let's talk about a couple modifications. The one major modification that I make, although these black nickel hooks that come right out of the package, this is a size 6, these are fantastic hooks, and most of the time I do keep these on, but I do get kind of goofy with modifying my lures. And one thing that I do is I like to go one size bigger. I'll put a wide gap 7 size 7/0 hook on the back end, short shank, wide gap 7. I like the short shank because you can hide it inside the tinsel or the buck hair, or I should say squirrel hair. And another thing that I'm doing here, shrink wrap. The shrink wrap, especially when you're fishing tinsel lures, is it stops this from happening. If you don't have some shrink wrap, and I'll do a video, and I believe Joe Bucher has a video on putting shrink wrap on lures. It's very easy to do. I'll get another video out on that. But just see that this keeps the hook in its sweet zone there, the sweet spot, you know, for the entirety of that cast. You're not going to let it get hung up like this and just get caught in the tinsel. So guys, there you have it, the 700. It is my number one, my go-to big musky lure for the state of Wisconsin. It's produced my best muskies, the Godorsky muskie, and a bunch of really big muskies that are coming out on season 3 here. I can't thank you guys enough for watching. I can't thank you enough for tuning in, for all your support, the comments. It's incredible, and we're having a blast putting the season 3 content out. We hope you're enjoying it. I certainly hope that you're learning and that you're enjoying it, that it's entertaining. And I'm going to put more posts out on the community forum. So stay tuned, and as always, thanks for watching.